Section 4 topics. Selling pest animal bait products. Selling pest animal bait products. Learning objectives. The bait selling process. Point of sale requirements. Bait user obligations. Risk assessment and section summary. Section 4.1. Learning objectives. This section provides information on the requirements as outlined in the directions of use, including the obligations of the 1080 and PAPP bait sales process and retailer responsibilities. The key concepts in this section include the direction for the use of 1080 and PAPP pest animal bait products in Victoria, how bait users are responsible for assessing and managing the risks of using 1080 before purchase, and that retailers must keep 1080 and PAPP records and be prepared to answer questions on the use of 1080 and PAPP bait products. On successful completion of this section, participants will be able to sell 1080 and/or PAPP to an authorised purchaser or agent. Describe the responsibilities of the seller at and after point of 1080 and PAPP sale. Keep appropriate records of the sale of 1080 and PAPP. And outline the responsibilities of the bait user to purchase and use 1080 and PAPP. Section 4.2. Selling pest animal bait products. At the point of purchase, the point of sale, bait product sellers must request to see a valid copy of one of the following: Agricultural Chemical User Permit, ACUP, with 1080 and PAPP endorsement, or Commercial Operator Licence with Vermin Destroyer endorsement and evidence of the successful completion of the accredited 1080 and PAPP user training course, or Pest Control Licence with authorisation to control pest animals and evidence of the successful completion of the accredited 1080 and PAPP user training course, or Pilot Chemical Rating Licence and evidence of the successful completion of the accredited 1080 and PAPP user training course. The reseller should verify that the signature on identification documents correspond to the signature on the delivery docket. Section 4.3. Point of sale requirements. At the point of sale, retailers have the following responsibilities: to only supply ready-to-use 1080 and PAPP pest animal bait products to an authorised person, to check that the purchaser has both an appropriate and valid authorisation to use 1080 and PAPP pest animal bait products, verify that the signature on identification documents correspond to the signature on the delivery docket, ensure the authorised person is provided with any relevant information in addition to the requirements in elements M3.2 safety data sheets and M3.5 information and safety signs that are set out in the AgSafe Code of Practice. This can be downloaded from the Module Resources page. The retailers may also check that each purchaser has the latest copy of the DFU and, if necessary, show them how to download it or alternatively print a copy or email a copy to them. Remind users of 1080 and PAPP pest animal bait products that they must comply with the label and directions for use. Non-compliance is an offence. Be prepared to answer questions from bait users regarding the use of products within the context of the label, safety data sheets, and the DFU. And keep records of supply for a period of 3 years. In addition, a person must not make any statement or provide any document or other information about a chemical product or its use that is false or misleading and likely to cause a person who relies on the statement, document, or information to commit an offence. Restricted chemical products may be supplied only to authorised persons. And users of 1080 and PAPP pest animal bait products must comply with directions for use on the package label. Non-compliance is an offence. An example record template is at Appendix 2 in the directions for the use of 1080 and PAPP pest animal bait products in Victoria. In addition to the point of sale obligations, retailers have a number of responsibilities for product supply, including keeping records, selling and supplying and storing in accordance with existing requirements for Schedule 7 poisons, A record of sale of poisons requires a person who sells or supplies by retail any Schedule 7 poison to keep an accurate record of the sale or supply, setting out the following details: the name and address of the person who purchases or obtains the poison or controlled substance, the date of sale or supply, and the name and quantity of the poison or controlled substance purchased or obtained. And the retailer should ensure that the ready-to-use 1080 and PAPP Pest Animal Bait product is correctly labelled. Supplying to an agent of an authorised user. A reseller is not permitted to wholesale 1080 or PAPP Baits products to another person or business who resells them onto the users of the bait product. However, resellers can supply bait products to an agent who is obtaining the baits on behalf of an authorised user or number of authorised users. For example, the organiser of a community baiting program. When supplying baits via an agent, accredited resellers need to verify that each individual user the agent is representing is authorised in order to supply the baits. Records of supply must be made for each of the authorised individual users, irrespective of if the baits are provided to the agent or the individual. Section 4.4 Bait User Obligations. The directions for the use of 1080 and PAPP Pest Animal Bait products in Victoria set out the responsibilities of the bait user to ensure that any risks associated with the use of 1080 and PAPP Pest Animal Baits are managed appropriately and promote the safe use of 1080 and PAPP Pest Animal Bait products in Victoria. All persons using 1080 and PAPP Pest Animal Bait products have an obligation to consider the following: the risk assessment, transport, storage, container disposal, safety directions, record keeping, and occupational health and safety. They also have an obligation to consider neighbour notification, laying of baits, signage, bait recovery, non-target wildlife, carcass recovery, distance restrictions, and incident reporting. As a retailer selling 1080 and PAPP bait products, you should be aware of the obligations of the bait user and be able to provide informed information on product use that is both accurate and legal. The bait user is responsible for assessing and managing the risks associated with the use of 1080 and PAPP bait products. Before purchasing or using any 1080 and PAPP Pest Animal Bait product, they should assess the risks associated with 1080 and PAPP bait use. Risk assessments should be completed prior to any and every use. The risk assessment assists to determine if baiting is an appropriate pest animal control strategy, the likely quantities of bait required, and potential risks that will need to be mitigated, such as impacts on non-target species. Risk assessment documentation should be completed prior to the purchase of 1080 and PAPP bait products. A copy of the risk assessment does not need to be presented to the retailer. Example risk assessment forms are available with the DFU, or you can download these from the Module Resources page. Records of use must be kept for a minimum period of 2 years. Section 4 Summary. Sale of 1080 and/or PAPP to an authorised purchaser or agent. Sale of 1080 and PAPP record keeping requirements, including the name and address of the purchaser, date, name and quantity of the poison. The requirement to keep the records of sale for 3 years. Retailers must be prepared to answer questions on the use of 1080 and PAPP Pest Animal Bait products, at least to the extent that can be addressed from the label, safety data sheets and the DFU. The directions of use of 1080 and PAPP Pest Animal Bait in Victoria emphasises the responsibilities of the bait user and promotes the safe use of 1080 and PAPP Pest Animal Bait products, and the responsibility for the 1080 and PAPP bait user to manage risks associated with baiting. When answering the final quiz for Section 4, you will have completed the online learning material for 1080 and PAPP Bait Supplier course for Victoria. Further documents can be downloaded from the Module Resources page. You will receive a certificate of completion after you have undertaken the workplace assessment by an AgSafe facilitator. And finally, please complete the evaluation survey for this course.